It was October 30th, 1978, a day that would change the destiny of two nations forever, especially that of Idi Amin Dada. In the early morning hours, Ugandan tanks and soldiers thundered across the Kagera River, storming into northern Tanzania. The air was thick with dust and arrogance, for Idi Amin had convinced himself that this bold move would cement his image as Africa's strongman. To him, it was not just an invasion, it was theater, a performance designed to humiliate his longtime rival, Julius Nyerere, and prove that Uganda's army was unstoppable. But the spectacle Amin envisioned quickly turned into something else. His troops, undisciplined and brutal, looted villages, torched homes, and left behind trails of destruction in Tanzanian territory. Instead of sparking fear, the invasion ignited outrage. Nyerere, a man known for patience and diplomacy, suddenly had the perfect justification to strike back. For years, he had sheltered Ugandan exiles who longed to see Amin overthrown. Now, with his homeland under attack, he had both the moral authority and the military resolve to act. What Amin failed to grasp was that this gamble would unleash forces far beyond his control. The invasion united Tanzanians like never before and forged a deadly alliance between Nyerere's disciplined army and Amin's exiled enemies. What was meant to be Amin's greatest display of power would become the very spark of his downfall. On April 10, 1979, Tanzanian and UNLF forces entered Kampala, the Ugandan capital, facing minimal resistance as Amin's loyalists collapsed or fled. On April 11th, Amin fled Kampala, reportedly first to Libya and later to Saudi Arabia. His flight ended his 8-year reign of terror, leaving Uganda in a state of devastation and prompting the establishment of a transitional government under the UNLF, which sought to rebuild a nation shattered by years of violence and misrule. In this video, we shall look at the life of one of Africa's most brutal dictator and how he spent his last days before his death. This is a story of how Idi Amin Dada, the butcher of Uganda, spent his last days in exile in Saudi Arabia. The fall of Idi Amin Dada, one of Africa's most notorious dictators, was the direct consequence of his ill-fated decision to invade Tanzania in 1978, a move that exposed the weaknesses of his regime and ultimately led to his dramatic flight into exile. By the late 1970s, Amin's 8-year rule over Uganda had already wrought economic collapse, social unrest, and widespread fear. His policies had decimated the economy, including the expulsion of the Asian community in 1972, which destroyed much of the commercial infrastructure. Politically, Amin ruled through terror, mass executions, and ethnic purges, which eroded both public and military loyalty. The army, once his instrument of power, was riddled with mistrust, desertions, and low morale, leaving it ill-prepared for sustained military conflict. In October 1978, Amin launched a surprise attack into the Kagera salient, a strip of Tanzanian territory along the Uganda-Tanzania border. The invasion was meant to divert attention from internal economic crises and to project strength both domestically and internationally. Ugandan troops advanced into Tanzania, committing widespread atrocities, including looting and the killing of civilians, further alienating local populations and drawing international condemnation. The Tanzanian response was swift and decisive. President Julius Nyerere mobilized the Tanzanian People's Defense Force, TPDF, and coordinated with Ugandan exiles organized under the Uganda National Liberation Front, UNLF. The Tanzanian forces, disciplined and well-trained, launched a counter-offensive that gradually pushed Ugandan forces back, recapturing the Kagera salient and advancing into southern Uganda. By early 1979, the TPDF-UNLF coalition had recaptured strategic towns, including Masaka. The fall of Masaka marked a turning point. The Uganda army, weakened by poor morale and defections, could not withstand the assault. The loss of key towns demonstrated the regime's vulnerability and emboldened both Tanzanian and Ugandan rebel forces. High-ranking commanders either deserted, were captured, or eliminated, leaving Amin increasingly isolated. The march toward Kampala, the Ugandan capital, was rapid and methodical. Tanzanian forces effectively cut supply routes and isolated loyalist forces, while civil resistance within the city grew. Kampala's defenses collapsed under the pressure of coordinated attacks and internal disorganization, leaving Amin's regime exposed. By April 1979, the situation in Kampala was desperate. Amin had retreated to his private residence in Luzira, seeking refuge as artillery and infantry advanced into the city. Loyalist forces were fragmented, and Amin faced the stark reality that his remaining troops could not defend the capital. On the night of April 10th or early April 11th, 1979, Amin chose to flee rather than face capture or death. He was airlifted by helicopter from Luzira to Jinja, escaping the advancing Tanzanian and UNLF forces. By dawn on April 11th, Kampala had fallen, marking the definitive collapse of Amin's rule. Following his escape from Kampala, Amin traveled eastward through Uganda, attempting to regroup with remaining loyalist forces. However, the army was in disarray, and his plans for a counter-offensive were unrealistic. On April 12, 1979, Amin boarded a C-130 military plane sent by Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi, flying first to Tripoli. He spent a short period in Libya before eventually relocating to Saudi Arabia, where he was granted asylum under strict conditions that prohibited any political activity. Throughout his flight, Amin relied on a small group of loyalists and the assistance of allied states, but his power and influence had effectively ended. Amin's fall resulted from a combination of factors: the structural weakness of his military, widespread economic and social discontent, overextension through aggression against Tanzania, and the effective coordination of Tanzanian forces with Ugandan exiles. His invasion of Tanzanian territory, intended as a demonstration of strength, became the catalyst for the disintegration of his regime. The failure of his loyalist forces, compounded by defections and low morale, ensured that he could not mount a meaningful defense or counterattack. Amin's flight marked the end of the Second Republic of Uganda, leaving the country devastated but freed from his oppressive rule. The transitional government established by the UNLF sought to restore order and rebuild the nation, while Amin spent the remainder of his life in exile, first in Libya and later in Saudi Arabia, never regaining power and dying in obscurity years later. His downfall remains a stark example of how miscalculated aggression, internal instability, and the loss of military cohesion can bring even the most feared dictators to a sudden and irrevocable end. After fleeing Uganda in April 1979 following his overthrow, Idi Amin eventually found permanent refuge in Saudi Arabia, where he would spend the last decades of his life in relative obscurity. His arrival marked the end of his violent, tumultuous rule and the beginning of a quiet, secluded existence under the strict supervision of the Saudi authorities. Saudi Arabia had agreed to host him on the condition that he refrain from political activity, particularly anything that could destabilize Uganda or involve attempts to reclaim power. In exchange, Amin was provided with a stipend, housing, and basic comforts, allowing him to live out his remaining years without threat of extradition or interference. Amin settled in Jeddah, in a suburban villa that overlooked the Red Sea. Despite his infamous past as the Butcher of Uganda, in Saudi Arabia, he lived a routine and largely uneventful life. Reports suggest that his days were filled with prayer, reading the Quran, occasional visits to the mosque, and solitary walks along the coast. He maintained a modest lifestyle compared to the extravagance and military pomp he had enjoyed in Uganda. Luxury vehicles, including a Cadillac and Range Rover, were at his disposal, but they were mainly used for basic errands and occasional trips into town. Amin also retained a nostalgic connection to Uganda, with periodic shipments of matoke, cassava, and other traditional Ugandan foods flown in to sustain his dietary habits. Despite being physically removed from power, Amin remained a figure of fascination for some journalists and visitors, though he gave very few interviews. In public statements, he often portrayed himself as a man who had turned inward, devoted to his faith and free from political concerns. There were occasional rumors of attempted involvement in regional politics or contacts with Ugandan exiles, but Saudi authorities closely monitored him and prevented any substantive political engagement. His only known breach of this arrangement occurred briefly in 1989 when he attempted to return clandestinely to Uganda to mobilize a rebel force. This effort failed, and he was returned to Jeddah under strict conditions. As the years went on, Amin's health declined. By the early 2000s, he was reportedly suffering from kidney disease, high blood pressure, and complications associated with aging. Despite the luxurious villa and relatively comfortable living conditions, he had little social interaction beyond family members and a few loyal attendants. On the 16th of August, 2003, Idi Amin died in the King Faisal Specialist Hospital in Jeddah at an estimated age of 78. His funeral was conducted privately, according to Islamic rites, and he was buried in the Ruwais Cemetery, far removed from the notoriety and violence that had defined his earlier life. Amin's decades in Saudi Arabia represent a stark contrast to his reign in Uganda. From a feared, flamboyant dictator whose rule brought terror and devastation, he became a secluded exile, a figure of quiet contemplation, nostalgic reflection, and ultimately, mortality. His life in Saudi Arabia serves as a final chapter of isolation, where power was stripped away, leaving only the man, removed from history, yet unable to fully escape its shadow. Idi Amin Dada remains one of the most infamous figures in African history. His legacy, shaped by the brutality of his rule, the chaos he inflicted on Uganda, and the remarkable, yet notorious, aspects of his personal life. Born around 1925 in Koboko, in the West Nile region of Uganda, Amin rose from humble beginnings to become a military officer in the colonial King's African Rifles. He eventually seized power in a coup in January 1971, overthrowing President Milton Obote and establishing a regime characterized by terror, unpredictability, and authoritarian control. Amin's rise to power and subsequent rule left an indelible mark on Uganda and the broader perception of African leadership, making him a figure remembered both for his audacity and the suffering he caused. Amin's political legacy is dominated by his role as a brutal dictator. During his 8-year rule from 1971 to 1979, it is estimated that between 100,000 and 500,000 Ugandans were killed through political purges, executions, and ethnic persecution. Amin's regime targeted specific ethnic groups, particularly the Acholi and Lango, consolidating power through fear. He expelled Uganda's Asian community in 1972, an act that devastated the economy, as the expelled community had controlled much of commerce and trade. Amin's foreign policy was erratic and often aggressive. His decision to invade Tanzania in 1978 ultimately triggered the Uganda-Tanzania War, which led to his overthrow. Internationally, he became notorious for his flamboyance, bizarre proclamations, and eccentric behavior, such as appointing himself Field Marshal, President for Life, and Colonel-in-Chief of the military, earning him nicknames like the Butcher of Uganda and the Conqueror of the British Empire. Amin's personal life was complex and, like his political life, marked by eccentricity and secrecy. He reportedly had at least 5 wives, though some accounts suggest he had more, reflecting the polygamous tradition common in his culture. His marriages were often politically motivated or designed to cement alliances within military and tribal networks. Amin's wives included Idi Amin, who was reportedly his first wife, and Sarah Kyolaba, sometimes referred to as his last wife, a former beauty queen who accompanied him into exile in Saudi Arabia. Other sources mention wives such as Mary and Martha, though detailed records are sparse, as Amin's private life was kept deliberately opaque and intertwined with the political machinations of his court. He fathered at least 7 children, though some reports suggest he may have had more. His children, like his wives, largely lived out of the public eye, particularly after Amin's fall in 1979. Several remained in Uganda or sought refuge abroad, often leading quiet, low-profile lives to distance themselves from their father's notorious legacy. Amin reportedly maintained personal relationships that were sometimes marked by fear and intimidation, mirroring his governing style. Those close to him lived under constant scrutiny, aware that disfavor could have deadly consequences. Despite his personal and political infamy, Amin's legacy is remembered in multiple ways. He is a symbol of dictatorial excess, political violence, and economic mismanagement. His rule decimated Uganda's economy, undermined institutions, and left deep social scars. Survivors recount horrific tales of public executions, torture, and disappearances, painting a portrait of a regime where fear permeated everyday life. At the same time, some remember him for his defiance of Western powers and efforts to assert Uganda's sovereignty, though these actions were often overshadowed by his brutality and erratic behavior. Internationally, Amin is frequently cited as an archetype of African dictatorship in the post-colonial period. Documentaries, books, and journalistic accounts have chronicled his excesses, including tales of erratic proclamations, extravagant banquets, and bizarre self-aggrandizement. He remains a figure of fascination for historians and the general public alike, embodying both the dangers of unrestrained power and the fragility of post-independence African states. Amin's death in 2003 in Saudi Arabia closed the final chapter of his life, but not the story of his impact. He died in exile, removed from the country he had terrorized, without having faced justice for his crimes. His family largely faded from public view, and Uganda gradually began the long process of reconstruction and reconciliation. His memory continues to serve as a cautionary tale about dictatorship, impunity, and the human cost of unchecked authority, making him one of the most infamous, controversial, and enduring figures in African history. In conclusion, Idi Amin's legacy is defined by terror, flamboyance, and the deep imprint he left on Uganda's political, social, and economic landscape. He is remembered for his extraordinary rise to power, his brutal rule, his eccentric personality, and the profound suffering inflicted on his country. His wives and children remain peripheral witnesses to a life that combined power, fear, and isolation. Amin's story endures as a testament to the consequences of unbridled authority and the fragility of post-colonial states grappling with governance, legitimacy, and social cohesion.